Thompson and Venables did not speak during the trial, and the case against them was based to a large extent on the more than 20 hours of tape-recorded police interviews with the boys, which were played back in court. Thompson was considered to have taken the leading role in the abduction process, though it was Venables who had apparently initiated the idea of taking Bulger to the railway line. Venables would later describe how Bulger seemed to like him, holding his hand and allowing him to pick him up on the meandering journey to the scene of his eventual death. The prosecution admitted a number of exhibits during the trial, including a box of 27 bricks, a blood-stained stone, Bulger's underpants, and the rusty iron bar described as a railway fish plate. The pathologist spent 33 minutes outlining the injuries sustained by Bulger. Many of those to his legs had been inflicted after he was stripped from the waist down. Brain damage was extensive and included a hemorrhage. The two boys, by then aged 11, were found guilty of Bulger's murder at the Preston court on November 24, 1993, becoming the youngest convicted murderers of the 20th century. The judge, Mr. Justice Moreland, told Thompson and Venables that they had committed a crime of unparalleled evil and barbarity. In my judgment, your conduct was both cunning and very wicked. Moreland sentenced them to be detained at Her Majesty's pleasure, with a recommendation that they should be kept in custody for very many years to come, recommending a minimum term of 8 years. At the close of the trial, the judge lifted reporting restrictions and allowed the names of the killers to be released, saying, "I did this because the public interest overrode the interest of the defendants." There was a need for an informed public debate on crimes committed by young children. Sir David Omand would later criticize this decision and outline the difficulties created by it in his 2010 review of the Probation Service's handling of the case. Shortly after the trial, and after the judge had recommended a minimum sentence of 8 years, Lord Taylor of Gosforth, the Lord Chief Justice, ordered that the two boys should serve a minimum of 10 years, which would have made them eligible for release in February 2003 at the age of 20. The editors of the Sun newspaper handed a petition bearing nearly 280,000 signatures to Home Secretary Michael Howard, in a bid to increase the time spent by both boys in custody. This campaign was successful, and in July 1994 Howard announced that the boys would be kept in custody for a minimum of 15 years, meaning that they would not be considered for release until February 2008, by which time they would be 25 years of age. Lord Donaldson criticized Howard's intervention, describing the increased tariff as institutionalized vengeance by a politician playing to the gallery. The increased minimum term was overturned in 1997 by the House of Lords, who ruled that it was unlawful for the Home Secretary to decide on minimum sentences for young offenders. The High Court and European Court of Human Rights have since ruled that, though the Parliament may set minimum and maximum terms for individual categories of crime, it is the responsibility of the trial judge, with the benefit of all the evidence and argument from both prosecution and defense counsel, to determine the minimum term in individual criminal cases. The case led to public anguish, and moral panic in Britain. Tony Blair, then the Shadow Home Secretary, gave a speech in Wellingborough during which he said, "We hear of crimes so horrific they provoke anger and disbelief in equal proportions. These are the ugly manifestations of a society that is becoming unworthy of that name." Prime Minister John Major said that society needs to condemn a little more, and understand a little less. The trial judge Mr. Justice Moreland stated that exposure to violent videos might have encouraged the actions of Thompson and Venables, but this was disputed by David McLean, the Minister of State at the Home Office at the time, who pointed out that police had found no evidence linking the case with video nasty. Some UK tabloid newspapers claimed that the attack on James Bulger was inspired by the film Child's Play 3, and campaigned for the rules on video nasties to be tightened. During the police investigation, it emerged that Child's Play 3 was one of the films that John Venables' father had rented in the months prior to the killing, but it was not established that John had ever watched it. One scene in the film shows the malevolent doll Chucky being splashed with blue paint during a paintball game. A Merseyside detective said, "We went through something like 200 titles rented by the Venables family. There were some you or I wouldn't want to see, but nothing, no scene, or plot, or dialogue, where you could put your finger on the freeze button and say that influenced a boy to go out and commit murder." Inspector Ray Simpson of Merseyside Police commented, "If you are going to link this murder to a film, you might as well link it to the railway children." The Criminal Justice and Public Order Act 1994 clarified the rules on the availability of certain types of video material to children. After the trial, Thompson was held at the Barton Moss Secure Care Centre in Manchester. Venables was detained in Vardy House, a small 8-bedded unit at Red Bank Secure Unit in St Helens on Merseyside, the same facility where, 25 years prior, Mary Bell had been held for half of her 12-year sentence. These locations were not publicly known until after the boys' release. Details of the boys' lives were recorded twice daily on running sheets and signed by the member of staff who had written them. The records were stored at the units and copied to officials in Whitehall. The boys were taught to conceal their real names and the crime they had committed, which resulted in them being in the units. Venables' parents regularly visited their son at Red Bank, just as Thompson's mother did every 3 days at Barton Moss. The boys received education and rehabilitation. Despite initial problems, Venables was said to have eventually made good progress at Red Bank, resulting in him being kept there for the full 8 years, despite the facility only being a short-stay remand unit. Both boys, however, were reported to suffer post-traumatic stress disorder, and Venables in particular told of experiencing nightmares and flashbacks of the murder. In 1999, lawyers for Thompson and Venables appealed to the European Court of Human Rights that the boys' trial had not been impartial, since they were too young to follow proceedings and understand an adult court. The European Court dismissed their claim that the trial was inhuman and degrading treatment, but upheld their claim they were denied a fair hearing by the nature of the court proceedings. The European Court also held that Michael Howard's intervention had led to a highly charged atmosphere, which resulted in an unfair judgment. On March 15, 1999, the court in Strasbourg ruled by 14 votes to 5 that there had been a violation of Article 6 of the European Convention on Human Rights regarding the fairness of the trial of Thompson and Venables, stating, "The public trial process in an adult court must be regarded in the case of an 11-year-old child as a severely intimidating procedure." In September 1999, Bulger's parents applied to the European Court of Human Rights, but failed to persuade the court that a victim of a crime has the right to be involved in determining the sentence of the perpetrator. The European Court case led to the new Lord Chief Justice, Lord Wolfe, reviewing the minimum sentence. In October 2000, he recommended the tariff be reduced from 10 to 8 years, adding that young offender institutions were a corrosive atmosphere for the juveniles. In June 2001, after a 6-month review, the parole board ruled the boys were no longer a threat to public safety and could be released as their minimum tariff had expired in February of that year. The Home Secretary David Blunkett approved the decision, and they were released a few weeks later on lifelong license after serving 8 years. Both men were given new identities and moved to secret locations under a witness protection style action. This was supported by the fabrication of passports, national insurance numbers, qualification certificates and medical records. Blunkett added his own conditions to their license and insisted on being sent daily updates on the men's actions. The terms of their release include the following: they are not allowed to contact each other or Bulger's family, they are prohibited from visiting the Merseyside region, curfews may be imposed on them and they must report to probation officers. If they breach these rules or are deemed a risk to the public, they can be returned to prison. An injunction was imposed on the media after the trial, preventing the publication of details about the boys. The worldwide injunction was kept in force following their release on parole, so their new identities and locations could not be published. Blunkett stated in 2001, the injunction was granted because there was a real and strong possibility that their lives would be at risk if their identities became known.